The views and opinions expressed in the following program are those of the hosts and guests, and not necessarily those of the staff or management of Worldwide Digital Broadcasting Corporation.
Knowledge is power, and this is powerful stuff. Wellness Education Cannabis Advocates of Nevada present the We Can 702 Nevada Cannabis News Hour with the We Can radio team. For the next 60 minutes, we'll take an in-depth look at the cannabis reform revolution sweeping the nation. Now, let's fire up the news hour. Here is the We Can radio team.
Good afternoon and welcome to another edition of the Nevada Cannabis News Hour, bringing you your cannabis news with context. We have a lot happening in Nevada this week, as a matter of fact. As I was going over stories for the show, I was just surprised by how many local news organizations are giving so much coverage to this. And before we get into it, it just boggles the imagination how quickly we've turned around on this issue. We have the Las Vegas Review-Journal, which is the paper of record in the state, which is owned by a rabid anti-pot person in the form of Sheldon Adelson, and yet pot news is a big major feature in their paper now.
News is news. A lot of people want to hear about it. A lot of people are interested in it, and it's one of the biggest stories that's been consistently covered over the past 6 or 7 months as the election has ramped up, and now the fallout from that has been obvious with the newly implemented recreational dispensary licenses being granted. And so now we are just kind of chewing through that. And of course, you know, people who not only people who are coming out of the cannabis closet and want to know more, but people who have been involved in the industry for a while who want to keep up to speed. So
what I find interesting, though, is that the editorial tone of the RJ, I would expect to be much more negative given its ownership's views, but they are very even-handed, and I've got to say that their reporters are doing a terrific job on most of these stories. And we've also got the Sun having its own marijuana news section, and even the Reno Gazette-Journal upstate has their own pot section these days. It really seems to be a subject that has arrived, and fortunately, people aren't afraid to talk about it anymore. I'll
agree with you on that point, and I'm actually pretty surprised at the tone that the Review-Journal has taken recently concerning marijuana news, because when Sheldon Adelson first acquired the paper, he took a pretty hard line against it, and he actually caught a small amount of national attention for it, because the Review-Journal, I believe, had come out previously and endorsed the recreational legalization ballot initiative, and then when he took it over, they recanted that that endorsement. And the Sun, well, the Sun is owned by a pretty liberal family.
And Brian Greenspun has a piece of a medical marijuana,
right? And their reporting is fairly spun to the left a little bit. So it's not a surprise to me that they have always been taking a more pro-cannabis tone with their writing and things like that. But it's like you said, up north and the more traditionally conservative north, and here in the Review-Journal, they've definitely changed their tone. And I almost wonder whether it's because public pressure is putting that on, or whether that's
maybe
just
they want to stay relevant
decided
in a time of declining newspaper sales. And if this is what the people want to read about, then it certainly is. So let's get to some of what the people want to read about. Then let's start with a story from just yesterday in the RJ by Michael Scott Davidson, and it's entitled "Marijuana Ads at McCarran Issue for Clark County Commissioners." The article starts by saying that Clark County commissioners grappled Tuesday this week with how to best limit marijuana ads on airport property. And although commissioners and Aviation Department Director Rosemary Vassiliadis agree that no advertisements should be placed on airport property, there was discord about vinyl-wrapped taxis. And she said that we have to be realistic. We never had in mind to monitor this cab can come here, but that cab cannot.
Right. And not only, I was just going to say that they already have marijuana-related advertising on some of the taxi cabs.
Medical marijuana.
Cannabis, like they make preloaded vaporizer pens, and I see them on the back of cabs and on top of cabs on a regular basis. And they were actually the first company that I noticed locally to be so bold as to go ahead and go to the taxi cab authority and attempt to advertise with them directly. So now, of course, they're not just selling to medical; they're selling recreationally. Of course, they want to expand their market base, and it'll be interesting to see how they deal with this, and also the possession laws that are being being
on the airport property.
Yeah,
well,
that are being talked about.
Because now you're talking about individuals as opposed to these companies who are doing advertising. And on that individual level, the county and Metro have already come out and said that if TSA finds something in the search of your bag, they're going to turn you over to a local police officer, which in this case would be a Metro officer,
right,
rather than a federal agent. If and also if they find you with it, you have the opportunity to dispose of your souvenirs before you leave Las Vegas. But if you were actually to fly on the plane with it, then the FBI could get involved. But that's not where they're looking to go with this at all. Commissioner Larry Brown, who I think has been conservatively a friend of this issue. He has not stood in the way too much in the past. He said yesterday that I would like to see us go to the limit at the airport and ban everything as related to recreational and medical marijuana. I personally don't want to see Las Vegas as the target market for the feds to come in and say, hey, you're pushing the envelope. And I disagree with Commissioner Brown on this, but what he's saying is exactly what members of the Nevada legislature said in 2001 when they had to write a medical marijuana bill,
right,
at the voters' insistence. And they said, we don't want to allow for dispensaries in this bill because we don't want to be the targets of the federal government coming in.
It seems like that's always the convenient fallback of everyone and every politician or policymaker that has a problem with expanding in any way regulations or policies concerning the cannabis industry, is they just go, oh, well, the feds can do this or that. And it's just, I haven't seen a lot of action recently concerning the cannabis industry that would lead me to believe that the feds are in a big hurry to jump all over this.
No, they've got enough going on with a number of different things. Our newest county commissioner, Jim Gibson, said the county needs to focus on being practical. He asked what would happen if an airline passenger landed with a T-shirt sporting a marijuana leaf, or if a dispensary owner whose car was wrapped to advertise their business used the airport parking garage. And I take that example one further. What if you had people coming in wearing, promotional T-shirts or sweatshirts or other,
which are popular now.
Yeah, which are popular, advertising these places or supporting these places. Are you going to tell them, oh, no, you have to cover that up?
Well, of course not.
Right. It is not practical. So I think the Commissioner Gibson brings out
a little bit of common sense also when they're looking at that. I don't think anyone was originally implying that they're going to start dragging people off of planes and force them to cover their shirt like you're at a goddamn voting booth and you have a politically motivated shirt where you have to cover it up. This is not on that same level. We're talking about common sense, and I think they'll come to a common sense solution. They're not going to have the advertisements on paper like big billboards on airport property, and they'll leave it at that.
Right. I'm letting the cabs go onto property. Absolutely, it makes sense because they're not part of the airport, and it is a public facility, so you really shouldn't be limiting who can come on that public
that's
facility.
A slippery slope. I don't think you should be able to do that. Well,
and that's why the Hare Krishnas are able to go through airports soliciting donations.
Well, what about the monorail? If they decide to expand it to the airport, is that going to be a problem if they decide to seek sponsorship for a wrap with that? There's all kinds of potential issues.
Well, I think that's long enough down the pike that probably we'll have legal marijuana in the country before then.
Unfortunately, true.
I think the biggest problem the county commission faces with this, and I understand they want to be careful, but the biggest problem that they face is enacting yet another set of regulations or ordinances that people are just going to say, that's ridiculous, and not comply, because that's been part of the problem with marijuana enforcement over all these years. Is there's a substantial number of people in the country who say these laws are ridiculous, and so if you're going to do something within a limited scope that's going to help the county. I don't really see how this does, but we'll follow on with this story as it goes. What else do we have here?
Well, the city of Henderson has recently decided to extend its pot moratorium for an additional 30 days, and this story came out yesterday on August 1st by Sandy Lopez in the Las Vegas Review-Journal. The citywide marijuana moratorium was extended for 30 days to give city staff time to present the city council with regulations at the council's next meeting.
So yeah, basically, they're playing for more time. Now, if you recall, a couple of years ago, when SB 374 passed, the municipalities, being North Las Vegas, Henderson, and Clark County, all were deciding whether they were going to have medical marijuana dispensaries there. And at that time, initially, both North Las Vegas and Henderson said, nope, we're not going to have them, and it was reported all through the papers. But having gone to a meeting up at business licensing with the business licensing people from these different venues, they all admitted it was going to happen. It was going to happen sooner rather than later, and the politicians were just posturing.
I think once the idea came down that other municipalities could poach the licenses from other
that's when Henderson,
that didn't want them.
Moved forward.
Yeah, I think that's when everyone decided that was no longer going to be an issue for their or
and it's not going to be cheap for these guys to play in Henderson.
Well, it's not cheap for anyone, but it's going to cost approximately $100,000 for the current operators to sell recreational marijuana
just for the license.
Mm-hmm. That's if you're a pre-existing business owner. So it is what it is, along with an additional 3% of the gross revenue every 6 months, said Michael Cahart, City Business Operations Manager. Got to get your cut.
Got to get your cut. Meanwhile, other people are out there are saying that Nevada made a terrible mistake in legalizing, and that we're going to come to rue the day and regret the decision. And I've seen this in several places, but this one's also in the RJ, Colton Lockhead, and the article is entitled "Anti-Marijuana Group Takes Aim at Nevada Rules." And
the last gasps of the prohibitionists.
Indeed. This is story is about Kevin Sabet, who is the president and president of Smarter Approaches to Marijuana, which we've talked about, Kevin, before last year before the election. And
Mr. Sabet wrote this article, did he not?
Well, no, this is Colton Lockhead, but he's got a lot of pull quotes in here. But we talked about Kevin Sabet last year before the election, how he was going around to these different states and he's being funded to just sprout lies about pot, and just his well-being, his financial well-being seems to be dependent on keeping pot to be the great boogeyman in our society. And he has been spinning lies on this for years, and he's been caught on this. But some people, they just keep going. You catch them in a lie, and they keep another one going. You catch them in a lie, and they keep another one going. This seems to be national policy these days, coming straight from the top. So I guess Kevin is just kind of playing what the truth.
Well, they already lost the war. They already failed to stop question 2 and the passage of it. And my fellow Nevadans soundly rejected that kind of divisive nonsense rhetoric, that same old that we've been hearing for the last 70 years or however long it's been since prohibition of cannabis has been hamstringing us. And now they're just using the same tired old arguments to try to influence the regulators
because
that
they
are
have
setting
no good
these
arguments.
rules. There's nothing left for them to do. They lost the war. Now they have no choice but to try to cut the legs out from under us in the regulatory process.
Very true. But nonetheless, Sabet says, we think Nevada should be very, very concerned. The cost of legalization will far outweigh the benefits for the residents of Nevada in the long run. Well, I'm not so sure about that, Kevin.
Well, he has a right to that opinion,
he
but
does.
We don't really believe that.
Well, Nevada officials noted that SAM, the Smart Approach to Marijuana, has opposed the ballot measure to legalize recreational marijuana and argued that Sabet's criticism reflect a limited understanding of the law and how some of the regulatory provisions came to be. The governor has continuously called for a well-regulated, restricted, and respected recreational marijuana industry in Nevada, and the department has carried out that charge every step of the way as we've implemented the progress, according to Tax Department spokeswoman Stephanie Clapstein. She said, we take very seriously our responsibility to protect the health and safety of Nevada's citizens and visitors. We also understand that there are those who flat out oppose marijuana and that they are bound to take aim at our regulations no matter how stringent they are. Wow, way to go, state of Nevada. Start smacking down these charlatans.
we have no choice but to defend our business interests at some point. And it's good that these people are coming to the defense of these tax-paying operators who have sacrificed so much to get these businesses up and running.
Absolutely. The cost, I mean, in the last story, we mentioned $100,000 and 3% every 6 months of the city of Henderson. That's just going to Henderson, on top of what they're paying to the state, on top of everything that they have to have to
and like,
run
you know, you were mentioning in this article about how it seems as though the Smart Approach to Marijuana group is concerned. They're like, oh, you know, safety concerns and this and that, and you know, it's too wild or whatever. I've been hearing a lot from the business owners and the patients and things like that, but what I haven't heard about the industry here is that we're not regulated enough. That is definitely something that I'm not hearing. What we're hearing is that if you talk to people who are these dispensary owners here in the state of Nevada, most of them have other business interests and other entities. This isn't their only game. And they have all been through licensing processes and all that nonsense. And they have all, from what I've heard, they've never been through anything like they have been through to get their marijuana licenses. We have the strictest laboratory testing in the country, strict business licensing, strict background check testing. You know, I don't know how much further we could go without being overly burdensome to this emerging industry. Some would argue, a lot of people would argue actually, that we're already being too burdensome.
You know, and it's an interesting left-right dichotomy there, that you now have people on the left who are, you know, accepting all these regulations, you know, big government to control the marijuana industry and to regulate it, and the Republicans, who would normally be, you know, very limited government, let business run, are not speaking up against this. Well, the Republicans that I've been hearing are generally still falling back to marijuana as a moral failing argument, rather than grabbing the bull by the horns and saying, okay, we've got this industry that the people voted, now let's make sure we do it right and we don't tie the hands of business.
That's not
in every other area.
Absolutely. They're just not thinking of it that way. I remember hearing Chris Christie give a speech about sports betting, and the federal government was kind of grinding on him a little bit because he was aggressively trying to pass a sports betting legalization bill through his state legislature. And he said, oh, you know, we're not going to let the federal government come in here and tell us what we're going to do and, you know, step all over us and, you know, had all these things. And I was thinking to myself, if you take the word sports betting out and insert marijuana into, that would have been a great speech on behalf of our cause. But his mind doesn't work in that, doesn't have that same process when he's talking about marijuana. He picks and chooses, and that's how a lot of my Republican colleagues really feel, is that the party platform of individual liberty and small, you know, helping small business only extends to the businesses that they approve of morally, regardless of whether their constituent base approves of it. And that's so disappointing.
And that's interesting. You know, we'll have to ask our Republican friends in the legislature when we see them about this, that that any other business, you would be going to the mat to defend business owners' rights. And here, why can't you look at it from that perspective? Well, we'll see where it goes.
I don't know.
Let's see what else is going on here. Well, also here in the state of Nevada, before we move on, we have the Associated Press reporting, written by Scott Sonner, that the Nevada Supreme Court has been asked to reconsider a ruling on their medical marijuana registry. And this comes a couple of days ago, July 28th, and it begins saying that a medical marijuana patient is asking the Nevada Supreme Court to reconsider its refusal to end mandatory state registration fees for medical pot cards now that marijuana is legal statewide for recreational use. And this Southern Nevada man is a migraine sufferer. He accuses the state of discriminating against medical pot users by regulating them more strictly than their recreational counterparts. Forcing medical pot cardholders to register with the state violates their constitutional rights against self-incrimination, given that the U.S. government still considers pot illegal, Hafter wrote in his appeal. We have a system where if you want to use cannabis as medicine, you need to get permission from the state first, and they need to monitor your acquisition. But if you just want to party, you can circumvent the state and go straight to the same dispensary and get the same product.
Well, and not only that, but that is a valid point. point, and it goes even deeper than that. When I first got on the medical marijuana program, we had to have a background check ran. We had to get our fingerprints. We had to submit our fingerprints to a goddamn database to be approved for a medical cannabis card. And then that went away. And now only some of our rights are taken away when we decide to jump through the hoops to get a medical marijuana card. Well, and not only that, but do you remember not too long ago when the state of Nevada's database for all the information was compromised, and a lot of that information ended up on the open market? Now, the state has proven itself unable to protect that very sensitive information, which is supposed to be very confidential.
You know, I agree with that, but I've got to say that you know, how far does an agency have to go to protect data in these days when the hacker community, the black hats in there, have gotten so adept and are cracking massive databases? There have been recent. I mean, at the Black Hat convention in Vegas just last week, they gave the hackers access to voting machines, and they broke into them within 90 minutes. So. I agree that the state needs to do a better job of protecting this, and maybe the best way to do that is to not have so much information.
Exactly. That's the whole point, is that if they didn't have access to this information that was really none of their business in the first place, this never would have happened.
Very true.
And here we are. I mean, I believe that Mr. Hafter has had this idea or this in the works for a while now, and he's been involved in a couple of other lawsuits against the state concerning privacy rights and things like that. So, you know, kudos to him. I hope he gets it done.
Well, he had argued this case, and they had. They've already turned him down, so he's trying to get them to reconsider. The court had said that there was no violation of Fifth Amendment protections from self-incrimination because applying for a pot card is strictly voluntary. And that's true. It is voluntary. If you wanted to use medical cannabis in the state of Nevada, you had to apply for a card. But why should you have to ask the state for permission for something medical for you? Nevada law does not compel anyone to seek a registry identification card, the court said, adding that the John Doe in this case wasn't so much arguing a right to health care as a right to use medical marijuana. And I don't know, that's kind of parsing words to me, because if he's arguing he has a right to health care, which you know, is not I think not a human right, but a right of civilization. When we live in society, specialized societies, you know, and we can't go out to the forest and pick the roots and berries and stuff that we need. We've got to turn that over to other people. And I would argue that there is a right to health care. But in this case, the right, it's not a right to use medical marijuana. It is the fact that if medical cannabis is the most effective substance to treat what you need, then
it becomes a necessity, does it not?
Part of your right to health care.
Yeah.
You know, it's not a separate issue. The Nevada Supreme Court justices, of course, are a very conservative group, and they're not going to listen to anything that we have to say on this program. But that doesn't mean that that we can't think that they're wrong. The court continued that the Supreme Court of Nevada continued that no court has recognized a fundamental right to use medical marijuana recommended by a physician, and the use of medical marijuana is still prohibited under the federal law and the laws of 22 states.
No, it's not. The federal government currently operates a medical marijuana distribution program right now, today. How is this still a thing?
Okay, let's amend for that. What the Supreme Court meant was that medical marijuana is still prohibited under federal law, except where the federal government is the dealer. Okay? Basically, that's it. So, you know, it's interesting to see how we've turned. Now they're saying it's still against the laws of 22 states. We're in the majority. We've got 28 states now saying, yes, it is a thing that we can use. You know, no court has recognized a fundamental right to use medical marijuana. Okay. I doubt that any court has recognized a fundamental right to use aspirin or Tylenol or penicillin either. You know, it's just kind of crazy that that's what they're hanging their hat on. And Hafter, to conclude what this article, Hafter said, for as long as the current system of medicine has been in place, patients never have had to pass through the gates of the government to access their care. There is not one area of medicine or healthcare besides medical marijuana where the government places a hurdle between the patient and the healthcare services sought. And I completely agree with Attorney Hafter on these
There
things.
are certain experimental treatments that are unavailable, like if you want stem cells or something like that. Like there's a lot of things that you should probably have access to in this country that you kind of can't because of either political posturing or the FDA hasn't approved such and such, you know, and that's another issue for another day. But definitely, if you're a patient and you want to try a medicine, you should be able to try whatever damn medicine you want, especially if it's been like an incurable disease or a terminal illness, or, you know, a right to choose is a right to be a human being.
Absolutely.
You know?
I had a friend of mine, his mom has lupus, and 30 years ago she went for Laetrile treatments, and Laetrile was something that was made out of the center of peach pits, and there was worry because there was cyanide in those pits as well, or a form of it, and it wasn't going to be safe, this and that, and so the FDA would not approve it, and she wound up having to go to Switzerland to get these treatments, and ultimately when she did, she managed to put her lupus into a remission that has lasted many, many years. And so why should our citizens have to go to another country to seek medical relief when we hear America is the best of everything? We're supposed to have the best health care in the world and all this stuff. Why are we denying people this? If people are going to take an experimental treatment and they're willing to sign off on the risks.
I know people who go out of the country all the time. A friend of mine's wife just went out of the country to Mexico for a gastric bypass surgery because of the cost.
That's because of cost, yeah,
And then another friend of mine who has Hodgkin's lymphoma recently returned from a trip to India to get experimental stem cell therapy because it's just not possible here. So, you know, there's all kind like medical tourism outside of the United States is becoming quite popular.
And I actually took a look at that a couple of years ago because of an issue that I was having, and found that just a mile south of the border in Tijuana, there are a number of medical facilities, hospitals, and private practices that are catering to medical tourism south of the border. And their prices were generally a third to a half of what you would expect to pay here. You know, so it's a big difference. And what else have we got here in...
Well, we have two.
Let's talk quickly about the break-in, because this is something that on Saturday I was at a Democrat assembly function, and Steve Sisolak was there, and of course he's running for governor now, and he's the chair of the county commission. And the first thing he asked me was, "Wow, what have you heard about blackjack this morning?" And the news was kind of sketchy coming in, because the big thing that people were asking, there was a shooting at a medical marijuana dispensary, and indeed that happened, but not like it sounds like.
Right. You know? Well, apparently what happened is a burglary happened at the Blackjack Collective down on Western near Oakey, and it happened at about 3:30 to 4 in the morning, and I saw the tape, and it was just a few kids. They pull up in their car, they bust in with crowbars, they try to, it looks like they were trying to dig through the wall to get to the back end of the vault or something like that, and they didn't get too far. They come out the back, the cops show up, they say, you know, drop your stuff. They start running. Cop fires a shotgun round in the air. Like they said, like the first reports, like they shot at him, but like from the ranges they were talking about with a guy who's trained that well with the shotgun, like he wouldn't have missed if he didn't want to. Long story longer, everyone ended up going to jail. They're all young, between the ages of 17 and 20.
Yep.
4 of them, you know, I don't think they ended up getting any product. They ended up like a laptop, I think, or some crap like that, but they didn't really get much.
Well, also the police suspect that that these 4 suspects may be involved in a string of burglary attempts throughout the
one
valley.
of them was 24. I'm sorry. The rest of them were very young.
Yeah, and so there have been several burglaries or burglary attempts at MMEs since they've opened up here, but this does not sound like Danny Ocean's going
No,
after
it's not the hole in the wall. It's not the hole in the wall crew.
It's not them either. This is just a bunch of kids who said, "Hey, there's pot there and there's money there. If there are women, we've got it made."
Okay, that's what the comment threads that the gold on the Facebook pages or the internet is not the news stories themselves, it's the comment threads that contain the ridiculousness. And a lot of the people who were commenting on this story were saying, you news organizations are the ones who put it out there. Like, these are all cash. They constantly say these are all cash businesses. There's nowhere to put the cash. They have all this weed and blah blah blah. And it's almost like they're trying to bait them to come in or something.
Back in the 1950s, one of the most notorious bank robbers of the age was a fellow named Willie Sutton. And when they finally caught him, they asked him why he continued to rob banks. And his response was, because that's where the money is.
Sure, yeah, that makes sense.
And it is the same here. You are turning these facilities into de facto banks, cash repositories, and also putting at great risk the owners or other people there who will have to transport.
I'm almost wondering whether there's some kind of legal ground to stand on with that. Like, example, state forbids dispensary owner / staff from carrying firearms.
Okay.
Some burglars come in, guy gets killed. Family of employee, just the bud tender, sues the state saying you are the ones who prevented these business owners from taking the necessary steps to protect their own business. Hell, my son, the guy who got killed, was a concealed weapons holder until you told him he couldn't carry his gun on the facility. Hell, he was a soldier. Or I'm just seeing the story in my head.
Well, I think the state would respond, as it did in the story about Jacob Hafter, is they would say nobody has to choose to work at a medical marijuana facility. Nobody has to get into that business to open it up.
That's nonsense. The presumption of safety should be,
the state would not be responsible.
In that case, then that should apply to all businesses like 7-Elevens or liquor stores or everyone else that gets robbed on a regular basis. Would you have similar rules for those people and disallow them to defend themselves simply on those grounds? Of course not. You would, in any other business scenario, attempt to defend those people and look for ways for them to be able to conduct business safely, rather than look for excuses as to why the victimization should be justified.
Yeah. Well, that leads us into another thing, but we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back to talk more about guns and pot in Nevada.
See you soon.
Crazy Terry here with your car care tip of the day. So it's not a bad idea every now and then to check your battery. If you don't know how to do it, have somebody check it for you. Just a visual inspection can tell you a lot about your battery. So as we can see here, this battery's got a hold down. It's nice and tight. The cables are on. They don't look bad. We've got a cover. We don't see any corrosion. Everything's kind of tight, looking good. A little bit of dirt, that's normal, but nothing's leaking. No real cause for alarm here. So that's a good sign. Doesn't mean it's good, but at least visually we know that it's intact. Okay, so we're looking at a battery here that shows signs of corrosion. We want to test that battery to make sure it's good. Usually when they're getting like this, there's going to be a problem leaking some acid at the top. We ran the test and we find out it has 396 cold cranking amps, but the battery requires 650. So it's just not enough. The battery is going to go soon. Better to know now than later. Okay, so the benefits of checking the cable is because this cable's rotted out. What we'll find is this is the problem, not the battery. So it'll save you from buying a battery, still having the no start, only to find out that it's a cable. This type of corrosion is common in diesels. Okay, so we're getting ready to jump the car, but we have to have some battery cables. And we have to check those too before we hook them up to the battery. So here we have our standard set of battery cables. We just look them over, see if the ends are frayed, if everything's connected all right. Everything looks good here. Wouldn't hurt to check the rest of the cable just to make sure the dog didn't get it and chew it up. We have red and black. Red's positive, black's negative. You always want to hook the positive up first and then the negative. And I'll show you how that's done right now. Keep these off to the side so they're not touching each other. Hook up your positive. You can find that right here by the plus sign, the negative sign. Plus is positive, red. Make sure that's securely hooked up. Keeping these away from each other. Hook up your negative cable. Just got to fight it on there. figure out a way to get it, wiggle it a little bit so it ensures a good connection. Now you're transferring voltage. If I hit these two together, we're going to spark. Kind of want to avoid that. Won't kill you. Kind of fun. A lot of people think if they can turn the headlights on, the battery's fine. That's not always the case. It takes very little amperage to turn a light on, but it takes a lot of amperage to start the starter. I recommend checking the charging system every oil change. At Sun Valley Automotive, there's never a charge for that. This is Crazy Terry with your car care tip of the day.
And welcome back to the Nevada Cannabis News Hour. Hey, we were talking just before the break about employees in medical marijuana establishments being able to protect themselves. And I came across an interesting article that I knew you would really have a lot to talk about here. So this comes from the the RGJ, that's the Reno Gazette Journal, and Mark Robinson is the author of the piece entitled "Is It Illegal for Pot Users to Possess a Gun in Nevada?" And their answer is yes. What do you think about this stuff, Perry?
I think that the National Rifle Association and its Nevada chapter, the Nevada Firearms Coalition, has really missed a golden opportunity in the last year or two to attempt to shore up gun rights as a whole. And it seems as though, once again, on the conservative aisle of our country, the conservative side of our country, gun rights are to be defended almost without exception. Almost. Unless you have about cannabis, unfortunately. And I can't really wrap my head around that. There was how do I put this? There was more talk of this concealed weapon, like if you have a pot card, you can't have a concealed weapons card, or vice versa. And I myself was kind of, I guess, a victim of this circumstance. A while ago, I carried both cards, and it got to the point to where an officer from Metro, they sent me a letter and I ignored it, and then they sent someone to my house and basically collected my concealed weapons permit right there on the spot. I had a choice. I could surrender my medical marijuana card, or I could surrender my concealed weapons permit. And I was giving the dude a bunch of shit. I'm just like, oh, this is nonsense and my rights. And he's just like, look, kid, I'm just doing my job.
Yeah.
He's
just the messenger.
Yeah, he's just the messenger. He doesn't, he doesn't even want to deal with it, really, it sounded like. And I'm like, oh, I'm going to sue and I'm going to do this. And he's like, well, you go do your thing, kiddo, but I can't leave without one of those cards.
Yeah.
So long story longer, I handed over my concealed weapons permit and began the process of trying to understand why this had happened.
But he didn't try to take your guns. I mean, you're still allowed possession.
He didn't care about the fact that I own guns. He was just not upset, but just frustrated with my unwillingness to comply with their directive. And
that is a police thing.
It was just one of those moments when I realized about how fragile our freedom is sometimes, and how quickly you can get caught up in one of these sensitive issues unknowingly. Yes. You see, I was brought to their attention when I went to renew my concealed weapons permit after having my marijuana card for a couple of years, because those concealed weapons permits are good for, I think, 4, maybe 5 years, so you don't have to go back often to get them. And it kind of had slipped my mind that I was on the program. I didn't think it would be an issue. And my question then is, how the hell did the entity that gives the concealed weapons permits end up with the knowledge that I was a medical marijuana patient in the first place? How did those pieces of information get crossed over for them to have the knowledge to deny me? Because I sure as hell am not going to walk into a gun store and go, oh yeah, check the box that says I'm a marijuana user. Like, come on, we're smarter than that.
That's a really good point. And I would say prior to the autumn of 2010, patients who were on the program, their data was being transmitted to the federal CLEATS database, which is a criminal law enforcement database. And so all the Nevada patients were listed in the federal government, with the federal government. Since that point, the state of Nevada has said that they've closed that exit point, and that information is no longer being shared. So in part, it could be a little timing issue. You know, with what you told me, though, I'd wonder if you could just say, okay, officer, here's my medical marijuana card, and then just go back and reapply to the state for a lost card, or to go to the state and say, well, okay, I'm not going to be a medical marijuana patient anymore, and pull me out of the program. And then a month later, go back and reapply.
You see, well, once you do that, if you want to pull yourself out of the medical marijuana program, you have to wait an entire year to apply for your concealed weapons permit.
Really?
You see, yeah, you have. There is a year period to where, and then you can apply. It's not that they're going to give it to you; they'll give you the ability to apply for your concealed weapons permit. You see, that was kind of a false statement he was giving me when he said, "Well, I have to leave with one or the other." He wanted to leave with that damn concealed weapons permit because if he would have taken the medical marijuana card, there would have been no authority. There would have been no authority given to him there at that point. There would have been nothing for him there, because the law didn't have a problem with me getting a concealed weapons, or excuse me, didn't have a problem with me getting a medical marijuana card. They had a problem with me getting a concealed weapons permit. Now let's take that a step further. I used to hunt a lot. I never had any problems with collecting my big game tags or my small game, or applying for my migratory bird stamps or anything like that. In fact, sometimes I still apply for my big game tags to get the bonus points, because I apply as a group. There are all these, if you know hunting in Nevada, you know there are all these rules that go along with getting your bonus points to getting these desirable tags. So even if you're not really hunting, you can apply on behalf of like a group that includes a friend of yours and things like that who is a hunter.
My dad used to do the same thing in New York.
Long story longer, they never say, hey, doper, you can't go hunting with your hunting rifle. No, of course not. They pick and choose where to enforce these laws. And my thought process, or my thought, is that these advocacy organizations who so adamantly support gun rights, or supposedly do, shut down the idea that they were going to stand up for medical marijuana patients' rights, because they put out the BS statement that they feared that if the NRA backed recreational or medical marijuana gun owners' rights, that it would jeopardize the reciprocity that Nevada concealed weapons permit holders have with 20 or 30 other states, which would potentially affect so many other gun owners' rights that they couldn't justify the risk, which is bullshit, because that's what they're supposed to do, take those risks on behalf of the gun owners. Now, where I'm going with this in a very, very roundabout, long-winded way is that if the NRA will willingly roll over on behalf of certain gun rights and allow the government or whoever to crack that door to telling people you can have guns but you can't, once you crack that door, it's hard to shut it again. And they're really opening the door and setting a dangerous precedent. It's a dangerous precedent, in my opinion, by allowing them to say, if you use a politically sensitive statement that we might not agree with, we'll back off. Now, mentally ill people, well, hell, hey, now, you can't take away their guns.
No, not yet.
Because, that's a problem. But people who smoke pot, that's a problem, because it doesn't fit with their it's complete nonsense. And this is where I have problems with not only the Republican Party, but the National Rifle Association as a whole, because they had this golden opportunity to embrace an entire subsection of society that is desperate for representation and desperate for someone to protect them, and they turned their back on them.
But they had the opportunity then to stand up for the principles of the Constitution as it applies to all citizens,
as
without
they claim
discriminating against targeted subsets.
Oh, that's all it is, though. And the black community and other communities have attacked the NRA for excluding them or being exclusionary, and so they see. And I've always thought, well, it's kind of nonsense, and all you got to do is go down and apply. But really, as we're seeing, they have set policies that trickle down from the national chapter to their state chapters that are instructive on how to exclude these groups of people who were desperate for protection.
Yes.
And I'm not exactly sure how to turn their mind around on that, but basically, you got to be real careful if you're a Nevada gun lover who also likes to smoke pot. I mean, there are potential felonies attached to some of these
Oh, absolutely. And Mark Robinson, the author of this article, went to State Senator Tick Segerblom and asked him whether he thinks it's illegal to possess a gun and use marijuana in Nevada. And he said concealed weapons permit holders are definitely violating federal law if they use marijuana, and that's why they can't get medical marijuana cards. He says, I don't think Nevada law applies because it's not an unlawful substance in Nevada.
I don't know.
Well, and goes down to, for the definition of controlled substance, though, the Nevada statute defers to the federal code, which lists marijuana as an illegal drug. So if Nevada lawmakers had defined controlled substances within any bill that you see coming through the legislature, the very first part of it is generally definitions. And so if they had defined controlled substances to not include marijuana, then it might be legal to consume pot and possess a gun. But as it is currently, it seems definitely it is illegal.
The fact that I can have more alcohol in my system and I can open carry, walk into a bar, and be more drunk legally than you would be allowed to drive a vehicle, operate a vehicle. I believe it's 0.08 for vehicles and it's 0.10 to have the legal limit to where you have to surrender or take your firearm off.
Oh, really? Oh, I didn't know that.
So, well, most people don't. And it's just one of those things, like, you can go ahead and get pretty buzzed, but, you know, even if you are just in possession of cannabis and you're not even under the influences of it, you're de facto potentially having a felony, and you potentially have a felony hanging over your head. And that's profoundly disappointing, to put it nicely.
This fellow, Don Turner, who is the president of the Nevada Firearms Coalition, which is the NRA state chapter in Nevada, said that part of the problem is that it just throws a wrench in all this reciprocal
nonsense. I think that they're making that up and using it as a fallback to not to justify their lack of compassion for not lack of compassion, but it's an easy out. Because that is a serious issue to a lot of people. Reciprocity is everything.
Well, he says, though, that if this fellow, Don Turner, says that if our laws make something legal that's illegal in another state or illegal at the federal level, then we lose reciprocity, is his argument. He said, that clearly anybody using marijuana legally is allowed to possess a gun in Nevada, but this throws a wrench into these reciprocal agreements. Now you've got Gary Powell, who's a public information officer for the Nevada Department of Public Safety, agreed that Nevada laws makes it illegal for pot users to possess a gun. We do not seek medical marijuana cards, but if we are made aware, the FFL dealership employee tells the point of contact staff, because the subject presents it to the FFI, we can use that to deny the transfer. And we talked about that on the show actually a year or two ago. We had a woman, Rowan Wilson, who had been suing the state over this, and she ultimately lost that suit because the state once again said it was not a it was a voluntary choice to get on the medical marijuana program. So as far as these issues of what it is and is it right, is it wrong? Well,
it's
what
voluntary,
happens if you
but
get
gun
caught?
rights are supposed to be gun rights are supposed to be constitutional. I remember these words shall not be infringed. It seems like they sure try their best to infringe a lot.
Well, and it's interesting,
and successfully so,
because the government always looks at issues of preemption. The federal government preempts state laws, and yet what we have here with Nevada state law says that a person who violates the provisions of this subsection is guilty of a Category B felony.
Ouch.
That's a pretty serious felony, and shall be punished by imprisonment in the state prison for a minimum term of not less than 1 year and a maximum term of not more than 6 years, and may further be punished by a fine of not more than $5,000. Now, the good thing is I haven't actually heard of anybody being prosecuted for this stuff. So, but
I think the
they're
state
just
is
looking for the right case.
Once again, it's like we talked about a couple weeks ago about the process of justice. There has to be a whole if a cop drags you in and says, well, I'm going to charge you for this, that, and the other, well, you don't have the authority to charge me with shit. You're a cop. You're not a district attorney.
That's true.
And so you can't.
He doesn't charge. He arrests you.
Yeah, you can't do. You can't do that. And then once those charges are brought, then we have to go to a jury and we have to go through all these these processes. So it's just I'm not.
It's frustrating. We've got lawyers arguing before our Supreme Court about this and not getting any satisfaction. So a couple of activists on a podcast aren't going to change those minds, I think. Let's see. Moving on. Let's look at something on the national scale, which is that the Republicans in Congress have managed to kill the medical marijuana provisions for veterans, and this comes from Chris Sosa over at Alternate. The Republicans successfully stopped the Veterans Affairs doctors from being allowed to recommend medical marijuana in states where the treatment is legal. The Veterans Equal Access Amendment will not move to debate on the House floor. The GOP lawmakers said they wouldn't allow it into the proposed VA funding bill, and effectively killing it. The sponsor of the bill is a fellow named Representative Earl Blumenauer, a Democrat out of Oregon, who has been a big pot supporter since he's been in Congress. He told McClatchy News that veterans have been failed by the VA on pain management issues. He pointed out that his amendment had bipartisan support, but somehow, he says, the House Rules Committee decided it wasn't going to allow this amendment. So even though you have people on both sides, you've got the stodgy old guys who are running those committees and saying, no, we're not going to go for this. We
love our vets, though, right?
We love our vets.
We'll do anything for our vets except actually help them.
Let them have the demon weed. Oh, my God. That would be worse than their 9 tours in Iraq and their 7 tours in Afghanistan. Somehow it's worse. Now, the only silver lining on this is that a Senate finance bill does contain this provision, and both of these bills are ultimately going to get worked through their houses, and there will be a reconciliation between the two versions. So it is possible that it could still get included. Not really likely. Now, on that issue, our local CD1 representative, Dina Titus, has said that she is going to absolutely push to get this approved for veterans. She's been a staunch supporter of the medical cannabis community, said that she believes that the move last week was a concession to Attorney General Jeff Sessions, who wants a federal crackdown on marijuana despite the trends of states legalizing or decriminalizing.
I saw people online slamming her, saying she's like a sellout and she's like pandering with this. She's like, oh, you're just pandering for votes with this bill. And I'm just like, damn, like that's brutal. Like a veterans' rights bill is pandering.
And I disagree with that. I've known Dina for about a decade now, and while she was quietly supportive at the beginning of my knowing her, over the past 6 years or so, she has really gotten to be much more out in front about this and much more a vocal advocate. I saw a Twitter from her office a couple of weeks ago saying, let's puff and pass these bills.
Yeah.
So I don't know that she's pandering for votes. I think this is a position which she has held for a long time and has become increasingly comfortable about talking about it.
And even if she was against it at one point, aren't people allowed to change their minds at the presentation of new evidence just because she's a politician?
Unless you're a politician, then you're a flip-flopper, and then it's a kiss of death. Anything else, yeah, you're allowed to. Now, Dina said that when you can keep something that is supported by the majority off the agenda, that is hardly a democratic way to make policy. Because she was one of the co-sponsors of this bill. She said it seemed like Republicans who blocked the amendment were worried about Sessions, who asked Congress in June to let him use federal funds to crack down on medical marijuana providers, as we've reported on this show previously. Now, the good news is last Thursday his request was denied by Congress. So he's going to try other ways to make this move forward.
He's having a tough time, though. He's not getting it done easy.
He's not getting a lot of love from his boss these days either. And I'll tell you what, maybe.
Well, hold on. Speaking of, they're kind of Trump and him have been getting into it lately.
Oh, yes.
And I heard Lindsey Graham come on come on an interview the other day, and he was like, if you fire Sessions, to pay over that.
Yes, Lindsey Graham, senator of South Carolina, is a leading Republican in the Senate and
former candidate.
Yeah, former candidate, and he's warning the administration not to step out of line on this stuff.
Well, we'll see how that goes.
Well, getting back to the veterans here, the American Legion, which is obviously one of the country's largest veterans organizations with 2.4 million members, called on Congress last September to remove marijuana from Schedule 1 and list and recognize cannabis as a drug with potential medicinal value. And even current Veterans Affairs Secretary David Shulkin has said that medical pot could benefit veterans. So there's some movement happening there, but it's still going real slow in the halls of the Senate. There's a lot of support for the purpose and the cause, says Shane Terry, a former Air Force fighter pilot and Top Gun instructor at Nellis Air Force Base. He said, I'm just surprised that it's been met with so much resistance. Terry, who did 2 tours in the Middle East, said the biggest issues medical marijuana might help with is the prominence of post-traumatic stress disorder and the high rate of suicide associated with it. The VA estimates that 22 veterans die from suicide per day, 1 every 65 minutes. And they're just trying to move. They're trying to do something that's going to help them. And as you say, all these people say, help the veterans, help the veterans. And now you've got something which can potentially keep them from going over that edge of depression.
Well, I've seen this in society, not just with veterans, but a lot. Like, people say, well, we need to help the homeless people. We need to help the mentally ill people. We need to help these or those people. And then when it actually comes time to do something, no one wants to do anything. Like, there's a project on the east side of Las Vegas. They want to build a mental health facility up there. And, of course, the citizens are like,
not in my backyard.
You can't build that here. Well, it's like, you're the same people who want to help all these people, but then when it comes time to help them, you refuse to help them. And it's the same thing here with our policymakers. You know, it's I almost feel like the example that they set trickles down to a level in our neighborhood. Like, the examples that they set bad precedent for us. In, like, you know, like, if they can get away with it, why the hell shouldn't we be obstructionist toward everything? You know, for no reason.
Yeah. Very true.
I don't know. Maybe I'm seeing too much into it, but. You know, it's awful to turn your back on the people who are supposedly the most important people. You know, everyone talks up the veterans and how important they are, and I don't know. Just practice what you preach, I guess. Yep,
I guess so. Well, let me just finish off with one final point in this story, though, that Representative Titus says she does not support immediately changing the federal classification of marijuana, but would like to see cannabis in a category of its own so that it can be studied properly. I do like Dina, but I gotta say, you're failing us on this one. We should reschedule cannabis immediately. If we really wanted to pay attention to logic and science, we would remove it completely and deschedule it from the federal schedule of controlled substances. And so next time I see her, I'm going to have a few words with her on this, because I think that not rescheduling cannabis at this point in time does more damage than keeping it in the Schedule 1. So, hey, we're in August now. We've got our party coming up in a couple of weeks.
That's right. Next weekend, August 12th, we have our 9th anniversary pool party. It is located on TP Lane in Las Vegas, Nevada. I'm not exactly sure what the address is, but if you want to go to our Facebook page or our website, weekend702.org, it is prominently displayed. It is our biggest event of the summer for sure. We'll have live entertainment. We have a pool. We have vendors, glass blowers. I mean, all kinds of good stuff. It'll be our first big party since recreational legalization
since
sales.
New Year's Eve, yeah.
Since the sales
right.
started on July 1st. So, I mean, we're very excited to be able to open our doors to anyone who wants to come rather than just patients. If you're looking to meet some like-minded people and some good, friendly folk, come on out and have some fun with us. It'll be from right around 4 o'clock to midnight as usual, and it's just a beautiful property that we had donated by a very generous friend of ours, and we're very, very blessed to have him.
So come on out and meet the gang, meet your fellow advocates and activists out there, and just have a great time. Before we go, let me hit on a couple of quick ones here. First is that the magazine High Times has long been considered like a stoner Bible. And I knew one of the owners of that company, a great guy named Michael Kennedy, who is also a high-profile attorney defending drug cases. And sadly, Michael passed away of cancer last year, and his estate wound up selling off his piece. And there's a company now called Oriva Capital, which in June announced that it had bought a controlling stake in High Times for $70 million.
Oh my!
Well, that's pretty good for the pictures of pot business, or the pot porn business as some call it. But they're now selling that company. They just bought it in June for $70 million. They are now selling it to Origo Acquisition Corp for $250 million. That is a nice turnaround in just in essentially 2 months.
That's unbelievable.
You know, I wish I could get in on deals like that somewhere. Well, Origo has no assets. It has no assets, and yet they're paying $250 million. I don't quite get how that works. But what they're going to do is use the IPO proceeds and bank financing to go public through this acquisition. So Troy Dayton, who's the CEO of ArcView, said that the marijuana market is a market that is growing at 27% annual growth rate. And the market is expected to exceed $22.6 billion in revenue by 2021. And so
growing almost as fast.
You know,
as the stock
if
market.
you're worried about being in a business that that is still federally illegal, and you don't necessarily want to put your money there, I'd say this is one of those picks and shovels things that when in October, when the High Times IPO comes out, that it might be worthwhile taking a look here. This is a publication that's been around for almost 40 years, and yeah, going on 50 years, and
they're the gold standard
they're a
in cannabis
player.
events too.
I'm going to take an eye on them. And the last thing that we just want to leave you with is a good friend of the movement, Willie Nelson, was interviewed recently by the Washington Post aboard his tour bus, and he urged Americans to bridge what he calls the great divide in politics. Now, he's been a marijuana advocate, and he's a purveyor. Now he's got Willie's Reserve, I believe, is his brand that's out there. Mm-hmm. He strongly agrees with Attorney General Sessions' statement in March that marijuana dependency is only slightly less awful than heroin dependency. And Nelson said that Sessions should try heroin and try marijuana, and then call me and let me know if he still thinks it's the same thing and one is as bad as the other. Well, you go, Willie. You know, next time you're in Washington, make sure you pass that message along.
Yeah, sure.
And next time we're here in the studio, we're going to pass a lot more news to you, keeping you current on what's going on in the cannabis industry and here in Nevada. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for spending some time with us, and we'll see you next week.
See you next week.